The dinner conversation held tension from the beginning. Saraphina discussed her country club friends, the vacation they were planning to Hilton Head, the new SUV Reginald had purchased. Because one can't simply drive around in anything, right, Zenobia? She said with a light laugh. One must maintain a certain standard. I nodded, uncertain what to say. Clementina interjected, touching Orion's arm possessively. Mama, I already told Orion that when we marry, he needs to consider a larger car. That car he has is quite modest. Orion laughed uncomfortably. The car is fine, babe. It serves me well. But we're going to have children, aren't we? Clementina insisted with a sugary voice. We need space, safety. Besides, my dad can assist with the down payment. I felt a knot form in my stomach. My son had purchased that car with his own earnings. I'd watched him work diligently to obtain it, and now this girl spoke about it as though it were an embarrassment. I think Orion knows what's best for him, I said with a calm yet firm voice. Saraphina stared at me for the first time all evening. Of course, Zenobia. Orion is a very intelligent young man. That's why I'm certain he'll make the proper decisions for his future. For his new family. The way she emphasized his new family felt like a silent slap, as if I no longer belonged to that future. Orion said nothing, simply continued eating with his head lowered, and I understood something terrible in that moment. My son was allowing them to push me aside. Saraphina continued talking. Now regarding the wedding. Clementina and I are already examining churches. The wedding will be at the cathedral, naturally. It's where my parents married, my grandparents, the entire family. And the reception at the St. Regis. Nothing overly ostentatious, but elegant, because things must be done properly, correct? I nodded, feeling my throat constrict. Nobody had consulted me about anything. Nobody had included me in these plans. It was as though my son's wedding didn't concern me. And what do you think, Zenobia? Saraphina asked suddenly with that artificial smile. Do you like the idea? It sounds beautiful, I said, forcing a smile. The important thing is that Orion and Clementina are happy. Exactly, she said, raising her wine glass. The important thing is their happiness and that they begin properly. Without burdens. Without burdens. The word lingered in the air like poison. Clementina excused herself to the bathroom. Reginald dozed in his armchair, and Saraphina seized that moment to lean toward me, her voice low yet clear. Zenobia, you appear to be a reasonable woman, so I'll be direct with you. Orion is a good young man, but he's accustomed to a certain life, a simple life, and that's acceptable. But now he's going to become part of our family. And our family has expectations. Expectations, I repeated, feeling heat rise up my neck. Yes, expectations. Clementina needs stability, a husband who can provide. And Orion needs to focus on his future, not on the past. Her eyes bore into mine. The past? I whispered. Don't misunderstand me, Zenobia. I know you've done a great deal for your son. That's admirable. But now it's time for him to fly independently. Without strings. Without emotional dependencies. I felt as though she'd driven a knife into my chest. I have never been a burden to my son, I said, my voice trembling yet firm. Of course not, she said, smiling. But now Orion has other priorities. And I'm confident that you, as a good mother, will know when to step aside when necessary. I couldn't respond because at that moment, Clementina returned from the bathroom. Orion resumed smiling as though nothing had occurred, and the housekeeper brought dessert, creme brulee. I didn't taste a single bite. When dinner concluded, Saraphina handed me a small box. A little something, Zenobia. So you remember us. Inside was a fine china teacup white with gold rims. Elegant, expensive, cold. Thank you, I said without meeting her eyes. In the car returning to my apartment, Orion remained quiet. So did I finally. When we arrived outside my building, he broke the silence. Did you like Saraphina, Mama? I looked at him, searching his eyes for the boy he used to be. The boy who embraced me and called me his hero. But that boy no longer existed. She seems like a strong woman, I said, selecting my words carefully. Yes, he replied, smiling. She's incredible. She and Clementina are extremely close. It's wonderful to see that. And us? I wanted to scream. Aren't we close anymore? But I said nothing. I simply exited the car, said goodbye with a kiss on the cheek, and climbed the stairs to my empty apartment. That night, while I brewed coffee in my old pot and gazed out the window at the city lights, I held the cup Saraphina had given me. It was beautiful, flawless. But when I brought it to my lips, I couldn't drink from it because that cup wasn't a gift. It was a message. You don't belong in our world. I left it untouched on the table and returned to my old stoneware mug, the one I'd used every morning for years. That one was mine. That one knew the taste of my life. And as I drank my coffee in silence, a question began growing inside me like a dark weed. How far would this woman go to remove me from my son's life? I didn't know yet. But I would soon discover. While I share all of this, I wonder where you're listening from. Write the name of your city in the comments. The months that followed felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. Every step brought pain, but I kept moving forward, smiling, telling myself everything would be fine, that this is normal. This is how things are when a son gets married, that I needed to learn to release him. But the truth is, they weren't letting me let go. They were tearing me away. Orion's visits became less frequent. Before, he came every Sunday without fail. He'd arrive with pastries, help me rearrange furniture for cleaning, stay to eat, and tell me about his entire week. But after that dinner at Saraphina's house, visits became bi-weekly, then monthly, then sporadic, always with the same excuse. Sorry, Mama. Clementina and I had plans with her family. Sorry, Mama. Saraphina invited us to lunch at the club. Sorry, Mama. We have to handle wedding details. Always Clementina. Always Saraphina. Always them. I said it was fine, that I understood he was busy. But inside, something was dying little by little. One afternoon, Orion called to tell me Clementina wanted me to join them in selecting the wedding dress. Really? I asked, my heart leaping in my chest. Yes, Mama, Clementina insisted. She says you're an expert in fabrics and wants your opinion. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Perhaps I'd been wrong about Clementina. Perhaps she genuinely wanted to include me. Perhaps it was all a matter of allowing time. On the appointment day, I arrived half an hour early at the boutique, an elegant buckhead shop with dresses costing what I earned in 6 months. Clementina arrived late, accompanied by Saraphina and 3 friends who wouldn't stop laughing and photographing with their phones. Miss Zenobia, Clementina said, kissing my cheek. I'm so glad you came. We need your expert eye. I sat on a velvet sofa while she tried on dress after dress. All beautiful, all expensive, all looking identical to my eyes. The friends applauded. Saraphina issued orders to the shop assistant, and I sat there quietly while nobody consulted me about anything, until Clementina emerged in a French lace dress strapless with an endless train. What do you think, Miss Zenobia? She asked, twirling before the mirror. All eyes turned toward me. I took a deep breath and spoke the truth. It's beautiful, but I think the strapless cut doesn't flatter you as well. You have delicate shoulders. A dress with lace sleeves or thin straps would better highlight your figure. The silence was immediate. The friends stopped smiling. Saraphina looked at me with cold eyes, and Clementina released a nervous laugh. Oh well, it's just that this type of dress is what's currently in fashion, Miss Zenobia. I'm not sure if you're very current with trends. Her friends laughed quietly but loud enough for me to hear. Saraphina stood and placed a hand on Clementina's shoulder. "My darling, you look spectacular in everything. Don't worry. This dress is perfect. We're taking it." Clementina smiled, relieved. "Yes, Mama, you're right, Mama." Clementina had called Saraphina Mama and still called me Miss Zenobia. I remained seated on that invisible velvet sofa while they continued discussing veils, headpieces, and designer shoes. Nobody consulted me again. When we exited the boutique, Orion was waiting outside. Clementina ran to him, showing him photos of the dress. "Isn't it true? I'm going to look precious, love. You're going to be the most beautiful bride in the world," he said, kissing her. I hung back, clutching my purse, feeling like a shadow. Orion finally noticed me. "How did it go, Mama? Did you like the dress?" "It's lovely," I said, forcing a smile. "Thank you for coming. I know this matters to Clementina. And to you." I wanted to shout, "Doesn't it matter to you that I'm here?" But I simply nodded. "Of course, baby. That's what I'm here for." Saraphina approached, took Orion by the arm, and said in a soft voice, "Orion, will you join us for lunch? We need to discuss final wedding details." "Of course, Saraphina. Mama is coming too, right?" Clementina asked, looking at me with that polite, empty smile. Before I could answer, Saraphina said, "Oh no, dear. Surely Zenobia is tired. Besides, we're going to discuss very specific organizational matters. We don't want to bore her." Orion said nothing. He didn't defend me, didn't insist, didn't say, "My mother is coming with us." I closed my eyes. I thought of my son, of the boy he'd been, of the man he'd become. And I said something I never thought I would say. It no longer matters what hurts. I need the truth. I hung up the phone, made myself coffee in my stoneware mug, and waited. Because now I knew the wedding wasn't the end of this story. It was just the beginning. And I was no longer going to be the silent victim. I was going to be the woman who knew. The woman who waited. The woman who, at the right moment, would make a single phone call and everything would crumble. Have you also kept a painful secret? Have you discovered something that changed everything you thought you knew? Tell me in the comments. The private investigator's name was Booker Hughes. He was a man around 50 with an ordinary appearance, glasses, and a calm voice that inspired confidence. We met in a discreet coffee shop in Decatur, far from anywhere anyone might recognize me. He brought me a thick manila folder filled with papers, photographs, and reports. "Miss Washington," he said calmly, "I found what you asked for. But before I show you, I need you to take a deep breath." "I already know what I'm going to see," I said, my hands clasped on the table. "No," he replied, looking me in the eyes. "Believe me, you don't know." He opened the folder, and my world finished breaking. The first photos were similar to those I'd received in the anonymous envelope. Orion and Saraphina in restaurants, hotels, in an apartment in Midtown that, according to the investigator, she had rented specifically for their encounters. "This apartment is leased to a shell company," Booker explained. "But I traced the payments. They all come from Saraphina Vance's personal account." I felt nauseous again, but I forced myself to keep looking. There were hotel records, the St. Regis, the Four Seasons, Ritz-Carlton. Rooms booked in her name, but security cameras showed both entering together. "Since when?" I asked with a voice I barely recognized as mine. Booker turned several pages and pointed to a date. "The first record I found is from 1.5 years ago. 1.5 years. My son had been sleeping with his fiancée's mother for 1.5 years. Since before he and Clementina got engaged. Since before I met that family." "There's more," Booker said with a grave tone. He showed me bank statements, transfers from Saraphina's account to Orion's account. Large amounts. 10,000 here, 20,000 there, 50,000 on one occasion. "What is this?" I whispered. Payments, Booker said. Your son is receiving money from her regularly. The word hung in the air like poison. Payments. My son wasn't just having an affair with that woman. He was letting her keep him. Is there anything else? Yes, Booker continued. And this is the most delicate part. He removed another set of documents. I investigated the finances of Mr. Reginald Vance, Saraphina's husband. He's bankrupt. The hardware chain that's supposedly so successful is on the verge of collapse. He has debts with several banks. And the house in Buckhead has 3 mortgages. I sat in silence, processing this. So it's all a lie? I asked. The wealth, the money, the status? It's a facade, Booker confirmed. A very well-constructed facade. But it's falling apart. And I think Saraphina knows it. That's why she's using her daughter, using Clementina. How? Booker removed more papers. Clementina inherited a considerable fortune from her maternal grandmother 2 years ago, close to 4 or 5 million in property and bank accounts. But that money is in a trust that can only be accessed under certain conditions. What conditions? That Clementina gets married. Once married, she has full access to that inheritance. And if something were to happen to Clementina while married, the money automatically passes to her spouse. I felt the air escape my lungs. Orion, I whispered. Exactly, Booker said. If Orion marries Clementina and something happens to her, he inherits everything. And considering the relationship he has with Saraphina, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Do you think they plan to harm Clementina? I asked, feeling horror rise up my throat. I don't have proof of that, Booker said carefully. But I do have proof that Saraphina is a very controlling, very ambitious, and very desperate woman. And your son, Miss Washington, forgive me for saying it this way, your son is completely under her control. I closed my eyes. I thought of my Orion, of the boy who embraced me, of the young man who graduated with honors, of the man I thought I'd raised. At what moment had he become this? At what moment had he stopped being my son and become the puppet of an unscrupulous woman? There's one last thing, Booker said. And it's the most important. He removed an audio recording device small. I managed to place a microphone in the Midtown apartment. It's illegal, I know. But I thought you needed to hear this. He pressed the play button, and I heard my son's voice. What if Clementina finds out? It was Orion. He sounded nervous. Then Saraphina's voice, soft, manipulative, maternal, and seductive at the same time. She won't find out, my love. Clementina is foolish. She only sees what she wants to see. But when we get married, how are we going to continue this? Orion, listen to me well. A pause. Sounds I didn't want to imagine. Then Saraphina spoke again with a firm voice. Clementina is not going to be a problem for long. You marry her. Wait a year, maybe 2. And then things happen. Accidents happen. Saraphina, I can't. You can't what? You can't be happy? You can't have the future you deserve? Orion, I love you. I love you like Clementina never will. And when all this is over, we'll be together, you and I, with all the money we need. Without hiding. A silence. And then my son's voice, so low I barely heard it. Okay, I'll do what you ask. Booker stopped the recording. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My son, my only son. The boy I raised with my own hands. The boy I taught about kindness, honesty, dignity. He was planning to marry an innocent girl to inherit her fortune. And he was letting a psychopathic woman plant the idea in his head that Clementina had to disappear. What are you going to do, Miss Washington? Booker asked softly. I looked at the photographs scattered on the table. I looked at the documents, the bank statements, the evidence of a conspiracy so twisted it seemed taken from a soap opera. But it was real. And it was my son. I don't know, I whispered. I don't know what I'm going to do. You can go to the police, Booker suggested. With this information, they can stop the wedding. They can investigate Saraphina and Orion. What would happen to my son? I asked, tears falling down my cheeks. Booker didn't answer because we both knew the answer. Orion would go to jail for fraud, for conspiracy, maybe for attempted murder if they managed to prove his intentions. My son would spend years in prison, and I would be the one who put him there. Think about it, Booker said. And when you decide what to do, call me. I'll be available. He gave me his card, paid for the coffee, and left. I stayed sitting in that coffee shop for hours with the folder in my hands, feeling everything that had been my life turning into ash. I thought about going to the police. I thought about talking to Clementina, warning her, saving her. I thought about confronting Orion, shouting at him, asking him how he could have become this. But I did none of that, because I needed something more than justice. I needed Orion to see, to understand, to feel the weight of what he'd done. I needed Saraphina to lose everything she'd gained through her manipulations. And I needed to do it in a way that no one could say I was the villain. Because I wasn't going to be the mother who destroyed her son. I was going to be the mother who let him destroy himself. And then, when he was at the bottom, when he'd lost everything, maybe, just maybe, he would remember who I was and what he'd been before that woman poisoned him. I took the folder, placed it in my purse, and left the coffee shop with my back straight and my head held high. The wedding was in 2 weeks, and I had a plan. A plan that started with simple acceptance. I was going to go to that wedding. I was going to sit at that table. And when the exact moment arrived, I was going to make a single phone call and everything would crumble. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't to attack. It's to let the truth do its work. The night of the wedding arrived like a storm everyone expected, except me. Because I knew that night wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be a revelation. I dressed carefully. I chose a simple navy blue dress I'd sewn years ago. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that drew attention. I pulled my hair into a discreet bun. I put on my mother's pearl earrings. I wanted to look dignified because I knew this would be the last time Orion would see me as his mother. The ceremony was at the cathedral. As Saraphina had planned, a beautiful church filled with white flowers and candles. There were more than 200 guests. Elegant people, wealthy people, people who looked at me sideways, wondering who that simple woman sitting alone in the 5th row was. Because they hadn't even given me a seat in the front rows. Clementina's family occupied the entire right side of the church. And on the left side, where the groom's family should be, there were only 3 of us. Me, a distant aunt of Orion's who barely knew him, and a cousin who came more for the free food than affection. That was all that remained of our family. When Orion walked to the altar, my heart skipped a beat. He looked handsome, elegant, mature in a dark gray suit I knew he hadn't paid for. His hair perfectly combed, with a nervous but happy smile. For a moment, just for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be again. And I almost regretted what I was about to do, almost. But then I saw Saraphina. She was sitting in the front row in a champagne-colored dress that screamed money. Her hair perfectly styled, her jewels shining under the candlelight. And when Orion passed in front of her on his way to the altar, Saraphina shot him a look I knew very well. A look of possession, a look that said, "You are mine." And Orion responded with a small, complicit, intimate smile, just before standing at the altar to wait for his bride. I felt bile rise in my throat. Clementina walked in on her father's arm. She looked beautiful, innocent, radiant. The strapless dress she'd chosen, despite my advice, fit her well, I had to admit. Her face shone with happiness. She knew nothing. That poor girl had no idea she was walking toward her own trap. The ceremony was long. The priest spoke about love, fidelity, commitment. Every word was like a dagger in my chest because I knew it was all a lie. When it came time for the vows, Orion took Clementina's hands and said firmly, "Clementina, I promise to love and respect you every day of my life. I promise to be your partner, your support, your refuge. I promise to build a future with you based on truth and trust." I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming, "Liar, liar!" Clementina cried with emotion. The guests sighed, and Saraphina smiled with satisfaction. When the priest said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," everyone applauded. Except me. I just watched them, Orion kissing Clementina, Saraphina wiping a fake tear, Reginald dozing in his seat. And I knew the moment had come. The reception was at the St. Regis, a huge ballroom decorated with thousands of white roses, tables with linen tablecloths, crystal centerpieces, a 5-course banquet, a live orchestra. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. They seated me at a table in the back, far from the head table, far from Orion, with people I didn't know who didn't speak to me all night. I was invisible again, but I wasn't there to socialize. I was there to wait for the exact moment. During dinner, I observed. I saw how Saraphina controlled everything from her spot at the head table, how she gave discreet orders to the waiters, how she looked at Orion every time Clementina wasn't looking. And I saw how Orion returned those looks. It was disgusting. It was brazen. It was sick. When dinner ended, the dancing began, the newlyweds' waltz, the dance with the parents. Orion danced first with Clementina. Then it was his turn to dance with the groom's mother. With me, I rose from my table and walked toward the dance floor. Everyone was watching. Orion extended his hand with a forced smile. "Mama, son," I replied, taking his hand. We danced in silence for the first few seconds. The music was soft, romantic. Everyone watched us. "You look beautiful, Mama," he said without looking me in the eyes. "Thank you," I replied. "You look good too." Another silence. "Are you happy?" I asked him. "Yes," he replied quickly. "Very happy." "Really, Orion, are you truly happy?" For the first time all night, he looked me in the eyes. And I saw something there, something small, something that might have been guilt. Or maybe just discomfort. "Yes, Mama, Clementina is wonderful. We're going to be very happy together. And Saraphina?" I asked, lowering my voice. "Is she wonderful too?" His body tensed. He stopped dancing for a second, then continued, squeezing my hand tighter. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do know, son." "Mama, this isn't the moment." "When is it going to be the moment, Orion?" "When? After something happens to Clementina? After you inherit her money?" He stopped completely, let go of me, looked at me with hard eyes. "What did you say?" "I know everything, Orion, everything." The music kept playing, but we weren't dancing anymore. People started looking at us, whispering. "You don't know anything," he said in a low, threatening voice. "You're inventing things. I have photographs. I have hotel records. I have bank statements. I have recordings." His face went pale. "Mama, what did that woman do to you, Orion? What did she do to turn you into this?" "You don't understand," he exploded, raising his voice. "You're never going to understand." The music stopped. Everyone was staring. Clementina came running over, her wedding dress dragging on the floor. "What's happening, Orion? Miss Zenobia?" Saraphina appeared out of nowhere. She stepped between Orion and me. "Zenobia, I think it's better if you leave. You're making a scene." "A scene?" I repeated, feeling rage rise up my chest. "I'm making a scene?" "Yes," she said firmly. "This is my daughter's wedding, and I'm not going to allow you to ruin it with your dramas." "My dramas?" I laughed without humor. "You want to talk about dramas, Saraphina?" Clementina looked at us without understanding. Orion was paralyzed. The guests murmured louder and louder. And then Saraphina did something I will never forget. She turned to the nearest table, grabbed a bowl of seafood gumbo that was still hot, walked toward me with firm steps, and threw it in my face. I felt the boiling liquid burning my skin. The spices, the broth dripping down my dress, the pain, the humiliation. Everyone screamed. Clementina shrieked. Someone ran for napkins, but I didn't move. I just stood there with the soup dripping down my face, looking Saraphina straight in the eye. She smiled, that calm smile, that satisfied smile, and said clearly so everyone could hear, "That is what you deserve." The room fell into complete silence. And then Orion, my son, my only son, the boy I'd raised alone, crossed his arms and said, "She's right, Mama." Those words cut me deeper than any knife. Clementina was crying. The guests were whispering. Reginald was still asleep in his chair. And I just took a napkin from the nearest table and wiped my burning face with all the dignity I had left. Then I walked toward the exit of the ballroom with my back straight, without running, without crying, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing me destroyed. But before leaving, I took my phone from my purse, dialed the number I'd saved, and said just 3 words, "It is time." I hung up, left the hall, got into my car, and as I drove through the dark streets toward my apartment, with my face burning and my heart broken into 1,000 pieces, I smiled. Because the call I just made wasn't to the police. It was to someone else, someone who was going to change everything. And they would never forget it. I still ask myself if I did the right thing. What would you have done in my place? I arrived at my apartment with my dress ruined and my soul even more ruined. But I didn't cry. I had no tears left. I removed the soup-soaked dress and threw it in the trash. I never wanted to see it again. I took a long shower, letting the hot water cleanse my skin, which still stung. When I emerged, I put on my old cotton pajamas, the ones with holes in the elbows, the ones I'd worn for years, the ones that were mine and no one else's. I made coffee in my stoneware mug, the same one as always, and sat before the window to wait. Because I knew the call I'd made was going to have consequences. Consequences that would start that very night. The person I'd called wasn't the police. It wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't anyone who could put my son in jail. It was someone much more powerful than all of that. It was Clementina's grandfather, Cornelius Estrada. Clementina's mother's father. The man who'd left those millions in trust for his granddaughter. An 82-year-old man, a widower, a retired businessman. One of those men who built empires with their own hands, and who didn't tolerate lies or betrayal. I'd met him months ago at one of the few family gatherings. I'd been invited to a casual lunch at Saraphina's house. I was quiet in my corner, invisible as always, when Cornelius sat next to me. "You're the boy's mother, right?" he asked with a raspy but kind voice. "Yes, sir, I'm Zenobia." "Zenobia?" he repeated, testing my name. "Pretty name." "And what do you do, Zenobia?" "I have a sewing shop. I make dresses, alterations." "Ah, you work with your hands like me. I like that. People who work with their hands have soul." We talked through the whole lunch. He told me about his life, how he started selling tools out of a truck and ended up owning a hardware chain across the Southeast. How he'd worked 14 hours a day for 50 years. How he'd been widowed 10 years ago and still missed his wife every morning. "My daughter Saraphina doesn't visit me much," he said with sadness. "She says I'm old, that I smell old, that my house is full of junk." "I'm sure she loves you very much," I said, trying to be kind. "No," he replied with brutal honesty. "My daughter loves me for my money, but I don't have money anymore. I left it all to my granddaughter Clementina, because she does visit me. She does hug me. She still has a heart." He gave me his card that day. "If you ever need anything, Zenobia, call me. I like people who work with their hands." I kept that card in my wallet. And 3 weeks after receiving the photographs, I called him. We met at his house, an old craftsman bungalow in Inman Park, filled with antique furniture and family photos. He received me with strong coffee and pastries. "Tell me, Zenobia, what is so urgent?" I showed him everything: the photos, the bank statements, the recordings, the documents proving the conspiracy. Cornelius listened in silence. His face changed color, first pale, then red, then purple with rage. When I finished, he stayed quiet for a long time. "My granddaughter is in danger," he said finally, his voice shaking. "Yes, sir. And your son? Your son is part of the plan?" "Yes, sir. Why are you telling me? Why don't you go to the police?" It took me a moment to answer because I had to be honest. Because if I go to the police, my son goes to jail. And as much as he has betrayed me, as much as he has become someone I don't recognize, he is still my son. I can't be the one to put him in prison. Cornelius nodded slowly. "But I can be," he said. "I just want Clementina to be safe," I replied. "And I want my son to understand what he's done, to see the consequences, to feel the weight of his decisions. And Saraphina, I want her to pay for what she's done, for manipulating my son, for putting him on this path, for planning to harm an innocent girl." Cornelius took my hand in his old hands, full of spots and wrinkles, but still strong. "Zenobia, you are a wise and brave woman. I am going to help you. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. When everything explodes, and believe me, it is going to explode, you are going to suffer. Your son is going to hate you. People are going to talk. You are going to be alone." "I am already alone," I said calmly. "No," he replied. "You still have hope. But when this ends, that hope is going to die. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of Orion, of the boy he'd been, of the man he'd become. And I said, "Yes, I am prepared." Cornelius nodded. "Then this is what we are going to do. You are going to go to that wedding. You are going to behave normally. And when the moment comes, when they show their true face, you call me. And I will do what I have to do." "What are you going to do?" "First, I am going to get Clementina out of that house that same night. I have lawyers. I have doctors. I am going to prove my daughter is incapable of caring for her own daughter. I am going to get a protection order. And the money, the trust will be frozen immediately. Neither Clementina nor anyone else will touch that money until a judge decides what to do. And believe me, with the proof we have, the judge will decide in my favor." "And Orion?" Cornelius looked at me with sadness. "Your son won't go to jail because technically he hasn't committed a crime yet. He's just a fool who let himself be manipulated by an unscrupulous woman. But he is going to lose everything. The marriage, the money, the family, the reputation. He is going to be left with nothing." "Good," I said firmly. "That is exactly what he deserves." And that was how we arrived at this moment, me sitting in my apartment, drinking coffee, waiting. At 11 p.m., my phone rang. It was Cornelius. "It is done, Zenobia. What happened?" I arrived at the St. Regis with my lawyers and 2 police cars. I told Clementina I needed to speak with her urgently. When she saw the photographs, when she heard the recordings, she fainted. We had to take her to the hospital. My God, is she okay? Physically, she's fine. But emotionally, that girl is destroyed. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, Zenobia. It is my daughter's fault. And that boy's fault. What happened with Orion and Saraphina? Orion tried to explain. Tried to say it was all a lie. But when he saw the proof, he fell silent. He stood there in his groom's suit, surrounded by guests who were whispering and pointing at him, without saying anything. And Saraphina? That woman, Cornelius's voice filled with contempt. That woman tried to deny everything. Said the photos were edited. The recordings were fake. That it was a conspiracy against her. Did they believe her? Of course not. The scandal was monumental. Guests went running. The hotel staff didn't know what to do. And Reginald, that useless man, slept through the whole drama. And now? Now Clementina is under my custody. We are going to annul the marriage. It was the same night, so legally, it's as if it never existed. The trust is frozen. And I filed a complaint against Saraphina for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder. Is she going to jail? God willing, yes. The lawyers say we have a solid case. Thank you, Cornelius. Thank you for protecting Clementina. No, Zenobia. Thank you for warning me in time. You saved my granddaughter's life. There was a silence. And your son? Cornelius asked. Do you want to know about him? I closed my eyes, breath deep. Tell me. He left the hotel at 2 in the morning, alone, without anyone. The guests looked at him with scorn. No one defended him. No one helped him. He left in his car. And I don't know where he went. I understand. Zenobia, your son lost everything tonight. How do you feel? How did I feel? Empty, sad, relieved, guilty, avenged, all at the same time. I feel at peace, I said finally, because I did the right thing. Yes, Cornelius replied. You did the right thing. Not many mothers have that strength. We hung up. I sat before the window with my empty stoneware mug in my hands. Outside, the city was still alive, lights, noise, people living their lives. And I was here, alone, but with a clear conscience, because it hadn't been revenge. What I sought was justice. Justice for Clementina, who didn't deserve to be used. Justice for me, who didn't deserve to be humiliated. And justice for Orion, who needed to understand that actions have consequences. I hadn't put him in jail. But I had left him with nothing, without money, without family, without reputation. And maybe, just maybe, when he hit rock bottom, when he lost everything, when he was completely alone, he would remember who I was and what he'd been before Saraphina's poison corrupted him. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months, without nightmares, without anguish, without that knot in my stomach that had accompanied me since I received those first photographs. Because I had done what I had to do. Not with rage, not with a thirst for vengeance, but with the cold clarity of one who understands that sometimes the greatest love you can give someone is to let them face the consequences of their own decisions. Even if that means watching them fall. Even if that means losing them forever. The days after the wedding were strange, silent, as if the world had stopped. I heard nothing from Orion for a week. He didn't call. He didn't write. He didn't come looking for me. And I didn't look for him either. Because I knew he needed time to understand what had happened, to process the magnitude of what he'd lost. And I needed time to heal. Cornelius called me every 2 days to tell me how things were going. Clementina was in intensive therapy, not psychiatric, but emotional. She had fallen into a deep depression after discovering the man she'd married was having an affair with her own mother. It's too big a betrayal, Cornelius told me. Too twisted. My granddaughter doesn't understand how it could happen. And neither do I. How is she? Fragile. Very fragile. But she is young. She will heal. With time, she will heal. The scandal spread like wildfire through the whole city. Social media exploded. Someone had recorded part of the confrontation at the St. Regis and uploaded it to the internet. The video went viral in hours. Orion leaving the hotel alone, his suit rumpled, his face undone. Saraphina screaming at Cornelius's lawyers. Clementina being taken out on a stretcher. People commented, speculated, invented theories. Some said Orion was a victim, that Saraphina had seduced and manipulated him. Others said he was an opportunist, a fortune hunter, a man without morals. The truth, as always, was somewhere in the middle. Orion wasn't completely innocent, but he wasn't completely guilty either. He was a weak man who had made terrible decisions, because he didn't have the courage to say no. By the second week, Cornelius gave me more news. The DEA accepted the complaint against Saraphina. They are going to investigate her formally for fraud and conspiracy. How likely is it she goes to jail? With the proof we have, very likely. The recordings are enough. The lawyers say she could face between 8 and 15 years. 15 years. Saraphina, the woman who'd humiliated me, who'd manipulated my son, who'd planned to harm her own daughter to keep her money, was going to pay. And Reginald? I asked. That poor man knew nothing. He's a drunk who has been disconnected from his family for years. The investigators confirmed he had nothing to do with the plan. But now he is alone. His wife is on her way to jail. His daughter hates him. And his business is bankrupt. Is he going to lose the house? Already lost it. The bank foreclosed last week. Now he's living in a rented room in Decatur on a miserable pension. I didn't feel pity for him. Because Reginald had eyes. He had ears. He had been there in that house for years, watching his wife destroy lives. And he had done nothing. Sometimes complicity is as guilty as the action. In the third week, Orion finally sought me out. He arrived at my apartment at 8 at night without warning. He knocked on the door with soft blows. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize him. He had a beard of several days, deep circles under his eyes, wrinkled clothes, unkempt hair. He had lost weight. He looked destroyed. "Mama," he said with a broken voice. I stood in the doorway without moving. "What do you want, Orion?" "I need to talk to you. We have nothing to talk about." "Please, Mama, just let me in." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, to tell him to leave, that he was no longer my son. But another part, that part that had carried that boy in my arms, that had sung him lullabies, that had cleaned his scraped knees, that part couldn't say no. I let him in. He sat on the chair in the shop, the same chair where I had received the first photographs, where everything had started to break. "Do you want coffee?" I asked out of pure habit. "No, thanks." I sat across from him, waited. Orion took a long time to speak. When he finally did, his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mama." "What are you sorry for?" "Everything. Everything I did. Everything I did to you. And Clementina? Are you sorry for her too?" He nodded, tears falling down his cheeks. "Yes, especially for her. I didn't want to hurt her. I never wanted to." "But you did," I interrupted with a cold voice. "You planned to marry her to steal her inheritance." "I heard the recording, Orion. I know what you said." It wasn't me talking. It was Saraphina." "Are you going to blame Saraphina for your decisions?" "She manipulated me, Mama. She made me believe that I was worth nothing without her. That you had raised me to be mediocre. That I deserved more." Every word was like a dagger. "And you believed her?" "Yes," he whispered. "I believed her." "Why, Orion? Why did you believe her and not me?" "Because she gave me what you never could. Money, right?" "Well, yes. But not only that. She gave me attention. She made me feel important. She made me feel like I was special." "I made you feel special too." "No, Mama. You made me feel guilty." I stared at him. "Every time I came to visit you, I saw your small apartment, your old clothes, your tired hands. And I felt guilty for having more than you. Saraphina never made me feel guilty. Saraphina told me I deserved everything I had." I stayed silent, processing his words. And I understood something terrible. My son hadn't left me out of malice. He had left me because he couldn't stand remembering where he came from. Because I was the mirror of his poverty, of his humble origins, of everything he wanted to forget. And Saraphina had offered him an exit, a way to become someone new, someone important. Someone who didn't have a seamstress mother reminding him of his roots. You know what is the saddest thing about all this, Orion? I said finally, that I never made you feel guilty. You just felt guilty because you knew deep down that you had abandoned me. I know, he whispered. I know, Mama, and I am so sorry. Where have you been these weeks? Cheap hotels. Spending the little I had left. I lost my job. No one wants to hire me. My name is all over social media. I'm a laughingstock. And the house Reginald was going to give you? Never existed. It was all a lie. The hardware stores are bankrupt. The house in Buckhead is foreclosed. There was no money, only debt. And Saraphina is in jail awaiting trial. Her lawyers say she's going to be sentenced to 10 to 15 years. Good, I said without remorse. Orion looked at me with red eyes. Don't you feel anything for her? Should I? That woman destroyed her own daughter. She corrupted you. She humiliated me. She planned a murder. Why should I feel anything for her? Because I loved her. Those words pierced me. No, Orion, you didn't love Saraphina. You were obsessed with what she represented. Power, money, status. But that is not love. Maybe you're right. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Orion asked what he had come to ask. Can I stay here, Mama? Just for a few days? Until I find a job? Until I can… No, I said firmly. Mama, please. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. I have no… You should have thought about that before. Mama, I'm your son. Yes, I interrupted. You are my son. And that is why I tell you no. Because if I let you stay here, if I rescue you now, you are never going to learn. You are never going to understand the weight of your decisions. Then what do you want me to do? Sleep on the street? I want you to do what I did when your father abandoned us. I want you to get up, work, rebuild your life with your own hands. Without shortcuts. Without manipulations. Without depending on anyone other than yourself. I can't, Mama. I'm not as strong as you. Then learn to be. Orion stood from the chair. He looked at me with a mix of pain, rage, and desperation. Someday you're going to forgive me, Mama. Maybe, I interrupted. But that day is not today. Nor tomorrow. Nor next month. Maybe in years. Or maybe never. That depends on you. On who you decide to be from now on. And if you change, if you become someone better, then maybe, just maybe we can talk again. But not as mother and son, but as two people who once knew each other and need to learn to know each other again. Orion nodded, crying. He walked to the door, opened it, and before leaving, turned one last time. I love you, Mama. I know, I replied. But love without respect means nothing. He left. I closed the door and stood there, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. I didn't cry, because there was nothing to cry about. I had done the right thing. The hardest thing. The most painful thing. But the right thing, that night, while I drank coffee in my stoneware mug and looked out the window, I thought about everything that had happened. About how Saraphina, that woman who believed herself so powerful, so smart, so superior, had ended up alone in a cell. About how Reginald, who had hidden behind alcohol for years, had lost everything he once had. About how Orion, who had sought wealth and status at any cost, had ended up with nothing, no money, no family, no dignity, and about how I've a humble woman. The seamstress, the mother no one respected, was still here. With my small apartment. With my shop. With my tired hands. With my stoneware mug. But with something they never had, peace. Because life always collects its debts. Not with violence. Not with vengeance. But with time. With patience. With the silent justice that arrives when you least expect it. Saraphina had called me insignificant once. Years later, I knew she was alone in that cell, looking at blank walls, without visitors, without love, without anything. And I wondered if in that moment, in that terrible void, she finally understood what she had lost. Not the money, not the status, but her humanity, her soul, everything that makes a life worth living. And Orion, my poor Orion, maybe someday he would understand that true wealth is not in what you have. It is in who you are, in how you treat people, in the dignity with which you face your mistakes. But that day hadn't arrived yet, and I couldn't wait for it, because my life, my precious life, kept moving forward. With or without him, 2 years have passed since that night. 2 years since I saw my son leave my apartment without a dime in his pocket and without a place to go. 2 years since I decided that the greatest love I could give him was to let him face the consequences of his own decisions. And in these 2 years, I have learned things I never thought I would have to learn. I have learned that silence can be more powerful than 1,000 words. That dignity is not negotiated. That forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And that sometimes letting go of someone you love is the bravest act you can do. My life has changed, not in spectacular ways. I didn't become rich. I didn't move to a big house. I didn't stop sewing. But it changed where it matters, in the deep, in the soul. I still live in my apartment in the West End. I still work in my shop. I still brew my coffee every morning in the same stoneware mug I've used for years. But I no longer feel invisible. I no longer feel small. I no longer allow anyone to make me feel less than I am, because I understood something fundamental. A person's worth is not in how much money they have, or in what neighborhood they live, or who they associate with. A person's worth is in their capacity to remain standing when everything crumbles. In their capacity to choose the right thing, even if it hurts. In their capacity to forgive themselves for not having been perfect. Cornelius became a very dear friend. He comes to visit me every 2 weeks. He always brings pastries from his favorite bakery and coffee he prepares, himself in his old house in Inman Park. We sit in the shop among scraps of fabric and spools of thread and talk about life. About what it's been like raising children in difficult times. About how it hurts to see the people we love take wrong paths. About how old age teaches you that in the end, the only thing that matters is being able to look in the mirror and recognize the person you see. Clementina asked about you last week, he told me on his last visit. Yes, I asked, surprised. How is she? Better, much better. She finished therapy last month. Started studying psychology. Says she wants to help other women who have gone through what she went through. I'm so glad to hear that. She wants to meet you, Zenobia. Says she wants to thank you for saving her. I felt a knot in my throat. I didn't save her. I just did what I had to do. That is exactly what saving someone means, Cornelius replied with a sad smile. Doing the right thing, even if it costs you everything. Clementina came to visit me one October afternoon. She arrived alone, without warning, knocking timidly on the shop door. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize her. She was no longer the fragile, scared girl I had seen at the wedding. Now there was something different in her, something stronger, more mature. Miss Zenobia, she said softly. Can I come in? Of course, child. Come in. She sat on the shop chair, the same one where Orion had sat 2 years ago. I made her coffee. We talked about unimportant things for a few minutes, the weather, her studies, how she liked living with her grandfather, until she finally gathered the courage to say what she had come to say. I want to thank you for everything you did. You don't have to thank me for anything. Clementina. Yes, I do, she insisted with tears in her eyes. You saved my life, literally. If you hadn't called my grandfather, if you hadn't done something, I did it because it was right. Because you are a good girl who didn't deserve what they were doing to you. My mother. Her voice broke. My own mother planned. I know, child. I know. Clementina cried for a long time. I sat beside her and stroked her hair as I would have done with a daughter. Because in a way, in that moment, she needed a mother, a real mother. Not the one she'd had, but the one she deserved to have. How did you get over it? She asked me when she calmed down. How did you manage to keep going after everything that happened with Orion? I breathed deep. It wasn't easy. There were nights I wanted to call him, rescue him, tell him everything was fine and he could come home. But I knew if I did, he would never learn. He would never change. And has he changed? I don't know, I admitted. 6 months ago, he wrote me a letter. He told me he got a job in a factory, that he's living in a small room in Norcross, that he's going to therapy, that he's trying to be better. Did you reply? No, not yet. Why? Because I need to be sure he is changing for him, not for me. I need to know he is doing the internal work he has to do. And that takes time. Clementina nodded thoughtfully. I'm doing that work too. In therapy, I learned I can't blame myself for what my mom did. That it wasn't my responsibility to detect something was wrong. That I was just a girl who trusted the wrong people. Exactly, I said, taking her hand. And now you are a woman who is learning to trust again. But in the right people. Starting with yourself. Clementina stayed all afternoon. She helped me sew the hem of a wedding dress. She told me about her plans to someday open a support center for women victims of abuse. And when she left, she hugged me tight and whispered in my ear, "Thank you for being the mother my own mother never was." That night I cried not from sadness, but from something more complex. Because I had lost a son. But in a way, I had gained a daughter. Not by blood, but by heart. 3 months ago, I received news of Saraphina. Cornelius called me one morning with a grave voice. "Zenobia, I need to tell you something about Saraphina." What happened? She was sentenced. 12 years in prison without possibility of early release. How is she? Destroyed. Physically, she's deteriorated a lot. No one visits her. Not even Reginald. She's completely alone. And how do you feel about that? Relieved, but also sad. Because that woman is my daughter. And despite everything she did, a part of me remembers the girl she once was before ambition corrupted her. I understood what Cornelius felt. Because I also remembered the boy Orion had been before the world changed him, before bad decisions defined him. And I wondered if one day he could go back to being that boy. Or if that boy had died forever. Orion's letter arrived 2 weeks ago. It was longer than the first. More honest. More vulnerable. He told me he had started attending a support group for people who had made serious mistakes. That he was learning to live with the guilt without letting it destroy him. That he was saving every dollar to someday be able to pay me back all the money he had borrowed and never returned. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Mama," he wrote. "I don't expect us to go back to what we were. I only hope that someday, when you see me on the street, you don't cross to the other side to avoid me. I only hope you know that every day I wake up trying to be a better man than I was yesterday. And every day I think of you. Of how I treated you. Of how I failed you. Of how I let a woman convince me that you were the problem when you were the only person who really loved me. Sometimes I pass in front of your building. I don't knock. I don't come up. I just stand there on the sidewalk, looking at your window, wondering what you might be doing. If you're sewing. If you're drinking coffee. If you ever think of me. And then I leave. Because I know I have no right to bother you. I have no right to ask you for anything else. But I want you to know something, Mama. Something I never told you enough when I should have. Thank you. Thank you for raising me alone. Thank you for sacrificing so much. Thank you for giving me opportunities you never had. And thank you for having the courage to let me fall when I needed it most. Because now I understand that you didn't let me fall out of hate. You let me fall out of love. And that was the greatest gift you could give me. I love you, Mama. I have always loved you, even if my actions said otherwise. Your son, Orion. I read that letter 5 times. I cried through every reading. And then I put it in the drawer where I keep important things, next to the first photo of Orion when he was a baby, next to his graduation diploma, next to a note he wrote me when he was 8 years old that said, "Mama, you are my hero." I haven't replied to him yet, but I think I will soon, because I have learned that forgiveness is not forgetting what happened. Forgiveness is remembering what happened, feeling the pain, and still choosing to move forward without carrying that weight in your heart. It doesn't mean I'm going to forget. It doesn't mean things are going to go back to how they were before. But it means I am ready to build something new, something different. A relationship based not on what we were, but on what we can be. Last night I had a dream. I dreamed I was sitting in my shop, sewing, when they knocked on the door. I opened it and it was Orion, but not the Orion of now, nor the Orion who betrayed me. It was the boy, my boy, with his big eyes and his innocent smile. "Mama," he told me, "I lost my way, but I think I found it again." And I hugged him and cried and said, "Welcome home, my son." When I woke up, I had tears on my cheeks, and I knew that dream was a sign. Not that everything was resolved, but that I was ready to start healing, to start forgiving. Not just Orion, but myself for not having been the perfect mother, for not having protected him from everything, for not having seen the signs sooner. Because the truth is that none of us is perfect. We all make mistakes. We all hurt people we love. We all get lost at some point, but what defines us is not the mistakes we make. It is what we do after. If we learn, if we grow, if we get up, or if we stay there on the ground, blaming others for our fall. This morning, while I prepared my coffee in my stoneware mug, I looked out the window and saw the streets of Atlanta filling with people in a hurry. People with problems, people with dreams, people with pain. And I understood that we are all part of the same story, a story of mistakes and redemptions, of falls and risings, of losses and findings. And my story, this story I have told you, is just one more among millions. But it is mine, and I am proud of it, because I survived, because I didn't break, because I maintained my dignity when everything around me crumbled, and because I learned that true strength is not in never falling. It is in getting up every time you fall. Now I am 61 years old, 2 years older than when this story began. And I feel I have lived an entire lifetime in these 2 years. I keep sewing wedding dresses for girls who dream of eternal love. And every time I sew, I think of Clementina in her strapless dress, of how that day she thought she was starting the best stage of her life. And I pray that someday, when she is ready, she finds a real love, a love that sees her, that respects her, that values her. Not for her money, not for her last name, but for who she is. And I pray for Orion, because despite everything, he is still my son. And a mother never stops praying for her children, even if they have hurt her, even if they have betrayed her, even if they have made her cry until she ran out of tears. A mother's love has no limits. But now I know it shouldn't have conditions that allow abuse either. Love must be firm, honest, brave. Love must tell the truth, even if it hurts. It must set limits, even if it costs. It must let go, even if it wants to hold on. Because only then, with that difficult and brave love, can we help the people we love to become the best they can be. If my story helps a single woman open her eyes, if it helps a single mother understand that loving doesn't mean permitting, if it helps a single person choose dignity over comfort, then it will all have been worth it. Every tear, every pain, every sleepless night, every difficult decision, everything. Because this story isn't just mine. It belongs to all the women who have been humiliated and have chosen to stand up. To all the mothers who have had to let go of their children to save them. To all the people who have faced betrayals and chosen forgiveness without forgetting. This story is for you who are listening to me. For you who maybe are going through something similar. For you who don't know if you're going to be able to survive the pain you feel today. I want you to know something. Yes, you can. You are going to be able to. Because you are stronger than you think. Because you have more courage than you imagine. And because pain, however terrible it may be, doesn't last forever. Time cures everything. It doesn't erase it, but it cures it. And one day, maybe months or years later, you are going to wake up and you are going to realize that breathing doesn't hurt as much anymore. That thinking about what happened doesn't destroy you anymore. That you can remember without bleeding. And that day you are going to understand that you survived. That you won. Not because you destroyed the one who hurt you, but because you didn't let them destroy you. I close this story with the same stoneware mug in my hands, the one that has accompanied me for years. The one that knows the taste of my coffee on difficult mornings. The one that has held tears and hopes. The one that has never failed me. Because in the end, the simplest things are the ones that remain. The humblest are the strongest. And the most ignored are the most valuable, like me, like you, like all the women who have been underestimated and have proven they are made of steel. Thank you for listening until the end. Thank you for allowing me to share my story with you. And remember, life always collects its debts. Not with vengeance, but with truth. With time. With silent justice. And in the end, always, always good triumphs. Maybe not in the way we expected. Maybe not when we expected. But it triumphs. Because the universe has a memory. And no one escapes the consequences of their own actions. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect. Those 4 words continue to ring in my mind. A sound I cannot silence. My name is Zenobia Washington. I'm 59 years old. And what I'm about to share is a truth I buried in quietness for months, until that quietness became too heavy to carry. On the evening of my son Orion's wedding celebration, his bride's mother, Saraphina, hurled a bowl of scalding hot gumbo straight at my face. The burning heat tore through my skin. The spices stung my eyes. The thick liquid ran down my ivory silk blouse. Yet what scorched me deeper than the soup itself was her expression. That serene, almost pleased smile she wore while staring at me with narrowed eyes, as though she'd just completed something she'd been planning for years. "That is what you deserve," she declared again, her voice steady as she lifted her chin. The banquet hall went completely still. Every single guest looked down. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke except my son, Orion, my only child. The boy I brought up on my own after his father walked out on us. The young man I gave everything to. He remained seated at the head table with his arms folded and said in a low, firm tone, "She's right, Mama." I felt the ground disappear beneath me. I didn't scream. I didn't weep. I didn't ask for reasons. I simply picked up the linen napkin from my lap, wiped my burning face with whatever dignity remained, and rose from my chair without making any sound. I walked toward the double doors with my spine straight, though inside I was trembling in every part of my being. But before I stepped out of that building, I did something nobody anticipated. I pulled my cell phone from my clutch, dialed a number I had stored weeks earlier, and spoke only 3 words. "It is time." Then I ended the call. I closed the door gently behind me. Nobody followed. Nobody questioned anything. I got into my car, turned the ignition, and as I drove through the darkened streets of Buckhead back to my modest apartment in the West End, one question circled endlessly in my head. How did I arrive at this moment? Because there was a time Orion would embrace me and say, "You're my hero, Mama." There was a time I believed a son's love lasted forever. There was a time I had faith. But that night, with my face searing and my heart fractured, I realized something I never imagined I'd need to understand. Sometimes those we love most deeply are the ones who wound us most profoundly. And sometimes silence becomes the only defense we have left. What followed that phone call is something they will never be able to forget. But to truly understand why I did what I did, I must first explain how everything began. How a mother who sacrificed everything ended up humiliated before a room full of strangers. And how I discovered far too late that my son was hiding a secret that would alter everything. Sometimes we place our trust in the wrong people too completely. Have you ever been let down by someone you cherished? Share your experience in the comments. I want to hear it. 3 years before that night, my life looked different. Not flawless, but it was mine. I resided in a comfortable apartment in Atlanta's West End with a balcony filled with red geraniums and bougainvillea that I watered personally each morning. I had established my routine: strong brewed coffee at 7, sweet potato pastries from Mr. Henderson's bakery on the corner, and then I'd open my small fine tailoring shop on the building's ground floor. I wasn't wealthy, but wealth wasn't necessary. After Orion's father abandoned us when my son had barely turned 5, I learned something many women take decades to grasp: that a woman can support an entire life with her own 2 hands without seeking anyone's permission. I created wedding gowns, prom dresses, and embroidered blouses for church ladies who desired elegance without flaunting their wealth. My hands understood every stitch, every hem, every secret that fabric holds when treated with patience. Orion grew up witnessing all of this. He watched me rise at 5 in the morning to complete an order. He saw me sew until my fingers bled. He observed me cry from exhaustion over the Singer sewing machine that once belonged to my grandmother, then dry my tears and continue forward. "Mama, when I grow up, I'm going to work hard so you can rest," he'd tell me with his large, earnest eyes while I prepared his breakfast before school. And I believed those words because Orion had always been a well-behaved child, responsible and loving. He studied without needing reminders and earned strong grades. On Sundays, he'd help me tidy the shop and ask me things about fabrics, colors, and how I knew which dress suited each customer. "Because I listened to them, baby," I'd explain. "People always reveal what they need, even without speaking." He'd nod thoughtfully before going off to play basketball with the neighborhood children. When he reached 18 and enrolled in business administration at Morehouse College, I felt every sacrifice had proven worthwhile. My son would have what I never possessed: a career, a degree, a future free from back pain and numb fingers. I worked double and triple shifts. I sewed dresses for weddings of families who would never welcome me to their gatherings, but who paid generously. I saved every dollar. I refused help and rejected loans because I wanted Orion to graduate without owing anyone anything. And he succeeded. He graduated with honors and secured employment at a prestigious real estate firm. He began earning well, wearing suits I tailored myself, bringing me flowers every Sunday when he visited for lunch. "Thank you, Mama," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "Everything I am exists because of you." And I felt whole until he met Clementina. The first time Orion mentioned her to me, I detected something altered in his voice, a new emotion, a brightness in his eyes I'd never witnessed before. "She's special, Mama. truly special. Clementina was the only daughter of an affluent Buckhead family. Her father owned a chain of hardware supply stores. Her mother, Saraphina, belonged to that category of women who'd never worked a single day, yet knew how to issue commands like a general. When Orion told me he wanted to introduce us, I put on my finest dress, the navy blue one with embroidery on the collar that I'd created for a distant cousin's wedding. I arranged my hair and wore the pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother. I wanted to create a favorable impression. The meeting took place at a Buckhead restaurant I would never have selected, too elegant, too costly. But Orion insisted. "I want you both to know each other well, Mama. Clementina means a lot to me." Clementina arrived wearing an immaculate white dress and a smile that failed to reach her eyes. She was attractive and polite, yet cold. We discussed trivial matters, the weather, her interior design career, the wedding plan she was already envisioning despite dating Orion for only 6 months. I smiled, nodded, asked all the appropriate questions. But something in my stomach twisted when she remarked, "My mother is eager to meet you, Miss Zenobia. I've shared so much about you with her." The way she pronounced Miss Zenobia sounded peculiar, as if my name required a title to exist in her world. Orion squeezed my hand as though conveying, "Everything will be fine, Mama." And I wanted to believe him because at that point, I still believed a son's love surpassed anything else. I still believed what we had constructed together, just the two of us across so many years, was unbreakable. I didn't yet know that some women regard other women as adversaries from the very first encounter. And I didn't yet know Saraphina had already determined, long before meeting me, that I wasn't sufficient for her family that afternoon. As we departed the restaurant, Orion embraced me tightly and said, "Clementina adored you, Mama." He told me this in the car. I smiled, but deep within, a small cold voice whispered something I didn't wish to hear. That girl is lying. And Saraphina is too. 3 months later, they invited me to dinner at their residence. That's when everything began to fracture. Saraphina's Buckhead house matched exactly what I'd imagined. Massive, cold, and filled with items nobody requires. Crystal chandeliers, Persian carpets, oil paintings, and gold frames. Furniture appearing straight from a decor magazine, so flawless it felt wrong to soil it merely by looking. When Orion and I arrived that evening, Saraphina greeted us at the entrance with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Zenobia, how lovely to see you," she said, offering 2 air kisses without truly touching my cheek. Come in. Make yourself at home." But I didn't feel at home. I felt like an intruder. Clementina descended the staircase, radiant in a pale pink dress that likely cost more than 3 months of my rent. She greeted me with the same polite, hollow smile as always. "Miss Zenobia, how nice you look." Again, that Miss Zenobia, as if my name existed only with that prefix, making me feel aged and foreign from another realm. Saraphina's husband, Reginald, was a large man with a raspy voice who barely shook my hand before returning to his armchair before the television. He barely spoke throughout the night, only grunting occasionally while drinking Scotch. Orion appeared happy and comfortable, as though this house belonged more to him than our small apartment where he'd been raised. That wounded me more than I cared to acknowledge. Dinner was served by a young housekeeper who moved in and out of the kitchen soundlessly, eyes lowered. Saraphina didn't even glance at her when requesting something. "More water." "Bring the bread." I tried smiling at the girl when she served me. She gave me a quick, almost grateful look before vanishing again. He simply said goodbye with a kiss on the cheek and departed with them. I stood on the sidewalk watching them walk away. And for the first time, I cried in public, not much. Just a few quick tears I wiped with the back of my hand before anyone could see. I took the bus back to my apartment. I didn't want to spend money on an Uber. When I arrived home, I made coffee in my stoneware mug, the same one as always, the one that knew the taste of my life. The china cup Saraphina had given me still sat on the table, untouched, gathering dust. I looked at it for a long time, and something inside me whispered, "This isn't going to improve. It's only going to worsen." But I didn't want to listen because I still believed a son's love was stronger than any outside influence. I still believed Orion would wake up, realize what was happening, and return to being the boy who embraced me and called me his hero. So I kept going. I kept smiling when they excluded me. I kept saying, "It's okay," when everything was wrong. I kept swallowing the pain so I wouldn't be a problem, wouldn't be a burden, wouldn't fulfill the prophecy Saraphina had planted in my son's mind. Your mother will suffocate you if you don't distance yourself. 2 weeks later, Orion invited me to dinner, just the two of us like before. I was thrilled. I arrived half an hour early at the restaurant. I dressed with care, wearing a burgundy dress I'd sewn myself with discreet embroidery on the collar. I wanted my son to feel proud of me. But when he arrived, he wasn't alone. Clementina was with him. "Sorry, Mama, Clementina wanted to join us. I hope you don't mind." "Of course not," I lied. Throughout dinner, Clementina talked incessantly about the wedding, the honeymoon they were planning in Bora Bora, the condo her father would give them as a wedding gift. "It's in Buckhead, Miss Zenobia. 3 bedrooms, 2 full baths, and a terrace with an incredible view. My dad says it's important to start well." Orion looked happy. I just smiled, and when the check arrived, Orion removed his wallet and said something that split my heart in two. "Mama, can you lend me $2,000? I spent a lot this month on wedding expenses and I'm a little tight." $2,000? I didn't have an extra $2,000. I barely had enough to pay my rent and shop expenses. But I withdrew the money I'd saved for the electricity bill and emergencies and gave it to him. "Of course, son. Don't worry." "Thanks, Mama. I'll pay you back next month." He never repaid me. And I never asked because in that moment I understood something terrible. I was no longer his mother. I was his bank, his safety net, his backup plan. But I was no longer the most important person in his life. That night when I returned to my apartment, I sat before the window with my coffee, gazing at the city lights and wondering how I'd ended up here, how a woman who'd given everything, who'd sacrificed her youth, her health, her entire life for a son, could end up feeling so invisible. But I still didn't know the truth. I still didn't know everything that had happened up to that moment was merely the beginning. That Saraphina had a plan. And that my son, my Orion, my only child, was already part of it. The wedding approached like an inevitable storm, and I kept pretending everything was fine. Orion went weeks without calling. When he did, conversations were brief, distracted, filled with uncomfortable silences. "How are you, Mama?" "Fine, son." "And you?" "Fine, fine. Busy with preparations, you know." "Well, I've got to go. Clementina is calling me." Click, and I was left with the phone in my hand, feeling something inside me empty a little more each time. But the worst part wasn't the short calls. The worst were the invitations that never came. I found out by accident there was a bachelor party for Oriona, barbecue at Reginald's house with a live band and friends of Clementina's family. Nobody told me. There was also a rehearsal dinner at an extremely expensive Italian restaurant with godparents and close family. Nobody invited me. When I asked Orion why they hadn't included me, he became uncomfortable. "Oh, Mama, they were small things. Last minute. We didn't want to bother you, bother me." As if my presence were a nuisance. As if I were a problem to avoid. But I stayed quiet, kept smiling, kept saying, "Don't worry, son. I understand." Until one afternoon, everything changed. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because Tuesdays have always been slow days at the shop. I was finishing the hem on a gala dress when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young delivery person with a blue cap and a manila envelope in his hands. Zenobia Washington? Yes, that's me. Sign here, please. I signed without thinking. The courier gave me the envelope and left. I closed the door and looked at the package. It had no return address, just my name handwritten in black ink. Something in my stomach twisted. I sat in the shop chair with trembling hands and opened the envelope. Inside were photographs. Many photographs. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. They were images of Orion, my son, in different locations. Restaurants, a parking lot, a hotel entrance. But he wasn't alone. He was with a woman. And that woman wasn't Clementina. It was Saraphina. I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. The first photo showed Orion and Saraphina leaving a restaurant. He had his hand on the small of her back. She was laughing with her head thrown back. The second photo was in a parking lot, Orion opening the car door for her. Their faces were very close. Too close. The third photo knocked the air from my lungs. It was at the entrance of a hotel, the St. Regis. Orion and Saraphina entering together. He had a hand around her waist. She was looking at him with a smile I'd never seen on her before, an intimate smile. A smile of a woman who knows a man's body. I dropped the photographs to the floor. My hands shook so violently I couldn't hold them. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. No, 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 no. This cannot be real. I picked up the photos with clumsy fingers and looked at them again and again, searching for some logical explanation. Maybe it was a business lunch. Maybe Saraphina needed help with something. Maybe. But there were more photos. Orion kissing Saraphina's cheek too close to her lips. Saraphina adjusting Orion's tie with her hands on his chest. Both entering an apartment building I didn't recognize. And the last photo, the one that made me release a moan I didn't know I had inside. Orion and Saraphina on a balcony at night. He was embracing her from behind. She had her eyes closed, leaning against his chest like two lovers who'd shared something forbidden. I rose from the chair, stumbling, and ran to the bathroom. I vomited everything I had inside until only dry heaves remained and a bitter taste in my mouth. I stayed there kneeling before the toilet, crying uncontrollably. My son. My only son. The boy I raised alone. The boy I gave everything to. The boy who called me his hero. He was having an affair with his fiancée's mother. With a woman 20 years his senior. With a woman who had humiliated me time and again, and suddenly everything made sense. That's why Saraphina despised me so intensely. That's why she'd wanted me out of Orion's life from the beginning. It wasn't because I was poor or simple or from another world. It was because I was her rival, the true mother, the one who knew Orion from before, the one who could see what she'd made of him. And that's why Orion had abandoned me. Not for Clementina, for Saraphina, for that woman who had seduced him, manipulated him, turned him into her plaything. I stayed on the bathroom floor for who knows how long, crying, shaking, feeling everything I thought I knew about my life crumble. When I finally managed to stand, I washed my face with cold water and returned to the shop. The photographs were still there, scattered on the chair. I picked them up one by one with hands that no longer trembled because the shock was giving way to something else. Something cold. Something hard. Something I didn't know existed inside me. I put the photos back in the envelope and sat before my sewing machine, looking at the black thread hanging from the needle. I thought about all the times Saraphina had humiliated me. I thought about all the times Orion had ignored me. I thought about the approaching wedding, about Clementina, that poor girl who had no idea her fiancé was sleeping with her own mother. And I thought about me, about the woman who'd worked until she bled to give her son a better life, the woman who'd swallowed insults and scorn without saying a word, the woman who'd believed a son's love was forever. That woman was dead. And in her place stood someone new, someone who was no longer going to remain silent, I took my phone and dialed a number I'd saved months ago when a client told me about a private investigator who'd helped her discover her husband's infidelity. Good afternoon. This is Zenobia Washington. I need your services. The voice on the other end was professional, neutral. Tell me how I can help you, Miss Washington. I need more information. More proof. Dates, places, everything you can get on two people. Their names? Orion Washington and Saraphina Vance. There was a pause. Any relationship between them? Yes, I said with a voice that no longer trembled. He is my son, and she is his fiancée's mother. Another longer pause. I understand. And what do you plan to do with the information, Miss Washington? I looked out the shop window. The city lights were beginning to glow. The sky was painted orange and violet. I don't know yet, I said. But when I know, I want to be prepared. I'll email you my quote. And Miss Washington? Yes? Some truths hurt more than the lie. Are you sure you want to know?